For centuries, they were regarded by Muslims as a transient and ultimately unimportant struggle. Indeed, it was only in the 19th century that Muslim historians even coined an Arabic term for the Wars of the Cross. Why then? Because after centuries of relative Muslim decline, they looked back and saw in the Crusades a prelude to the indignity of colonization. That's not how they were considered at the time.
I think in those days it was seen as just the urge for conquest, okay, to expand your kingdom, and which was basically regarded as legitimate, as if the exercise of power. Seeing them as an incursion of one civilization on another, of one religion on another, I think is a more modern construction, which comes under the modern idea of sovereignty. Of course, in the Islamist view of the world, after the conquests of Islam, the Christian religion, in alliance with Judaism, would constantly conspire and again try to reconquer what it lost. And this is why now, especially the Bin Laden types, Al-Qaeda, for example, don't speak of colonialism or imperialism, Western imperialism. They shift the terminology to what they call the new crusaderism.
It must be said that many Westerners have seemed to encourage this interpretation. As recently as 1920, for example, the French general Henri Gouraud celebrated taking control of Damascus by walking up to Saladin's tomb and saying, "Saladin, we have returned. My presence here consecrates the victory of the cross over the crescent." Or one might mention the controversial rallying cry delivered in the aftershock of 9/11.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while.
George Bush says, let's have a crusade against terror.
I can assure you.
How does that sound to you?
What it indicates for us is like a war, bad people.
Bad people.
Bloodshed.
Bloodshed.
That's the first thing I think of.
Yeah.
But in Britain, we talk about we're going to have a crusade to stamp out drunkenness.
Do you?
Yeah, we're going to have a crusade against drugs. We're going to have a crusade to make sure that people, don't talk on their mobile phone whilst driving.
That's surprising,
Yeah.
because it
Can you believe
really
that?
has a very negative connotation here.
And if Westerners romanticize the Crusaders, then it's not surprising that Muslims lionize the man who defeated them. What Muslims today need, they say, is a new Saladin to drive the new Crusaders out.
I think he's huge because of the analogy, which is also in the popular mind and is being used, exploited, and so on, regarding the Zionist movement, its colonization of Palestine and so on, as some kind of repeat of the Crusaders' occupation of Palestine. And the inference is that just as the Crusaders at some point were pushed by some kind of Salah ad-Din, this will probably happen again at some point.
The Crusades may be a bad word in the Middle East today, but at the time they looked like no more than a blip, a hiccup in the flow of Muslim conquest. When the last Frankish knight had been booted out of Acre, the Muslims pushed on into Asia Minor, modern Turkey. One by one, they sacked the ancient Christian cities as they made for Constantinople, an objective for Muslim generals ever since its capture had been, so tradition says, predicted by Muhammad himself. Constantinople was the city founded in 330 AD by Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor. And it was the great beating heart of the Christian Roman world, or at least of the eastern half. The Eastern, Greek-speaking Roman Empire, what we call Byzantium, had drifted further and further apart from the Latin-speaking western half. And when the first great disaster engulfed Constantinople, it was at the hands of Christians from the west.
If I say the word crusade, you think of Christians with crosses attacking Muslims. But that's to forget the most devastating crusade, the Fourth Crusade, when French and Flemish knights, conveyed by money-grubbing Venetians, came here to Constantinople, the queen of cities, for 9 centuries the centre of Christian civilization, and sacked it in an act that has been called one of the most shameful in human history. The crusading vessels punched through the great chain that lay across the Golden Horn. This wasn't cross-on-crescent violence, this was cross-on-cross.
On the 12th of April 1204, the Crusaders entered the city and began a 3-day orgy of violence. They pillaged its treasures and left much of it burned or in ruins.
We may think the Sunnis and the Shiites are irrational in their feuding, and yet we forget the frenzy with which the Latin Christians fell on their Greek Orthodox counterparts, the systematic rapes, the mass slaughter, and amid images of horror, one stands out for me, Abbot Martin of Paris standing over a cowering Greek Orthodox monk and demanding that he produce his treasure, and then tottering away with his ecclesiastical vestments bulging with loot. When they came here to Hagia Sophia, the jewel of Greek Orthodox civilization, they smashed the altar into 4 pieces of booty and they scattered the bread and the wine on the ground. And up here, where the very patriarch himself had his seat, they installed a drunken prostitute who sang bawdy songs and capered around for their amusement. And the kicker was that they thought they were doing God's will, and the sufferings of their victims were proof of the favour of the Almighty.
A new Latin Empire was proclaimed, and for over 50 years the papacy was able to boast that the Eastern Empire had been recaptured for Rome. It didn't last. The Byzantines took back control, and yet Constantinople was a shadow of its former glory, enfeebled by the vicious sack of 1204. The city's rulers looked out with fear as the Muslim armies advanced. Slice by slice, the warlike Turks were taking over what remained of the Byzantine heartlands, modern-day Turkey. And everyone knew that Constantinople was their target.
From the first Arab conquest, the capture of Constantinople was very important because of its strategic importance. Constantinople is not merely a city. It is the gate between West and East. It is the center of the exchanging trade and goods and thoughts between the Asian Eastern world and the European Western world.
By 1452, there can't have been a person in Constantinople unable to imagine the horror ahead. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II was moving with such ease that he built this huge fort only a few miles away from which to besiege the city.
I can imagine the palpitating terror in the hearts of those Christian monks only 4 miles away in Constantinople when they heard the news in 1452 of the preparations being made here at Rumeli Hisari by Mehmet. It took him only 4 months to build these staggering fortifications, and the news must also have come to them of this enormous 27-foot gun, the biggest cannon ever made, being forged by some renegade gunsmith called Urban, so huge a man could apparently crawl down its barrel.